Hello and welcome back. In this video, I've chosen a large piece of white cedar that came out of my front yard. It's been drying steadily in my basement for the last couple of years. And I figured it was time to try taking a whack at it with my recently purchased lathe. First thing I did was I went through and cut it down the center on my bandsaw. The grain came out really, really pretty, I think, for this particular wood. White cedar has a little bit of a different look and feel to it than red cedar does, although it is just as soft. To make it easier to turn, I went ahead and drew a stencil of a circle on the face of it and cut it kind of to rough shape on the bandsaw just to give it a slight bit of a more round shape. With that done, I went ahead and screwed on the back plate to the surface of it. For some pieces, I prefer to use the back plate just because it feels like it's going to stay a lot better than if I were to use a worm screw, especially on a larger piece of wood like this. I'm not sure that I would trust a worm screw too much. So I've had smaller pieces actually work their way off of the screw before. So moving over to the lathe, I mounted the piece onto the lathe, gave it a quick setup. And continued to just move forward with trying to chip this sucker away. So larger pieces like this tend to have a bit of imbalance to it. As you can see, it tends to want to rock one way versus the other. So I did start off with kind of a preset value on the lathe itself in terms of speed. I wanted to make sure that it was not going to wobble too much, and so I think here I'm starting at like 350 RPM. This is my 5/8 inch bowl gouge. Mostly use this gouge for just roughing out the pieces that I want to turn. So I find that the larger tools are really nice for that. You really hog out a lot of material. It gave me a little bit of problem at the very beginning. There was a couple of spots where it just really wanted to dig in. There's a couple of spots here where you'll see the piece of wood actually stop on its own. Having it catch like that sort of surprised me a little bit, only because I really didn't anticipate it. I should have. It's like one of those kind of silly mistakes you make. I guess you over anticipate what the wood's going to do. So with this particular piece of wood being white cedar, I was very cognizant of the fact that it being soft, it should turn fairly easy. However, that comes with a risk. Soft wood tends to want to break apart a little bit easier, a little bit faster. So you got to watch your speed a little bit. So this was something that I have luckily learned watching other wood turners. So eventually I worked my way down, finally got it nice and roughed out, got rid of most of the bark, and slowly worked on getting it down to a shape that I thought was appealing. For this particular bowl, I decided to go with a tenon rather than a mortise. Looking back on it, I probably should have done a mortise, only because my set of coal jaws are not large enough for bowl this size. I have a set of mini coal jaws, and I'm looking at investing into a larger set of coal jaws later for the finishing part of it. But for this, I do a tenon. A tenon works really well here because of the size. Getting it all flattened out and set up. Again, roughing everything with the 5/8 inch bowl gouge. If you're interested in knowing what kind of tools that I use, I'm happy to post that information. Just leave me a comment in the comment section, and I'll be happy to answer. So I feel like I never stop learning with this stuff. I'm constantly growing and learning new things, and so it's always nice to gain insight from other people as well. So here I've switched over to my 1/2 inch bowl gouge. Cutting out the angle of the tenon. I like using the angle scraper for this, just because it makes the job really quick and easy. And since I have the tool, I might as well use it. I mean, I could do it with a fine detail gouge, but I don't know. You go with the tools that you have. There's technique for everything. So at this point, I'm just sort of refining the overall shape of the outside of the bowl, trying to get it to kind of a look and feel that is appealing. One of the things that I really like about rough wood is the variation in cracks and breaks, little things in the wood that give it some character. I don't know, I just really like that a lot. Depends on the kind of wood I'm using. If I use rough wood, I'll like really stick with the nature of the wood. But if it's like a blank, something that you purchase off the store like Woodcraft or Rocklet or whatever, and you get this nice clean piece of wood. For something like that, I go straight into very as perfect as I can get results. I don't know. It's just a different feel for me. So for most of the sanding, I started with an 80 grit, 80 grit to just get the real rough surface smoothed down. There's a lot of chip out that occurs on this white cedar, so I did go up to a 320 grit. For very soft woods like this, I don't find that it's really useful to go anywhere above 320. I've tried it in the past and it's just sort of a waste of time. Once the sanding was over with, I went ahead and pulled it off. You can see here I kind of had to work at it a little bit. For some reason, I'm getting my parts kind of locked into place, so I've got to figure that out. I don't know if I should get like a I don't know, maybe a nylon washer, or maybe I should put a little grease on the end of it just to make it come off a little easier. I don't know. If you have any suggestions for this, please feel free to drop it down in the comments. I'd be greatly appreciated if you have some ideas for that. Because again, I always find that my tools, either my chuck or the back plate, they seem to get locked into place on this particular spindle. So here I'm putting on the bowl chuck. I'm going to slot in the bowl. The one downfall of using the back plate that I have found, and this has been pretty consistent with the back plates that I use, is that when you go to turn it on after you've flipped the piece around, I find that it has just a slight bit of a wobble to it. And I don't know if that's just the way that I'm seating the piece into the chuck, or if it's just the nature of that particular part of the process. Again, more learning experiences, I suppose. Now here I'm moving the headstock out to 22 degrees to make it easier for me to reach inside the bowl and turn the inside of it. I find this to be exceedingly satisfying, and I did see this on another video recently of another wood turner, and I realized very quickly that, wow, wait a minute, I can do that with mine. So I was kind of excited to have that moment of realization that, man, this makes it so much easier. So I found myself being able to just relax into the cut and not having to bend over the lathe and have my face down near the bowl so that I could actually see what I was doing. So having it out at the 22 degrees was really fantastic for me. Huge change from what I used to do. And I'm going to assume that with larger bowls, I might go out to, say, the 45 degree position and just have that much more space of which I can work on. Now, this technique here I learned from turnwoodbowl.com. The gentleman over there spends a lot of time teaching how to use different techniques with turning, and I've learned quite a few things from him just watching his videos. So, highly recommend checking out his stuff, especially if you're new to wood turning. He's got some fantastic technique that he teaches. Very, very nicely explained and easy to understand. So this technique of doing little steps down through the inside of the bowl actually allows for the tool to have a place to rest, so that when you're going into a cut, it doesn't just all of a sudden catch and drag on the piece of wood and slide off one direction. So those little ledges really help stabilize the tool, the cutting tool. Now you notice here I'm really looking at that line that's going across. And one of the things that I was doing was checking to make sure that the whole bowl wasn't wiggling. I was afraid that was all the way in, going all the way through the bowl. Luckily for me, it wasn't. So I made myself a little depth gauge to be able to see how deep I was cutting into the bowl. It's just a couple pieces of pine with a slot down the middle of it with a wing net on it, just to be able to slide the piece back and forth. So as I go deeper and deeper into the bowl, I will periodically check. I'll stop and I'll look and I'll see how deep the bowl is compared to what my setting is on the depth gauge. You can easily make one of these yourself. I've seen some on sale before, but I just decided to just make my own. So there I'm at my depth that I wanted. Gave you a nice top-down view of what it looks like. And I went into turning the rest of the inside of the bowl, so I knew I shouldn't go any deeper than that. So luckily that crack didn't go all the way down into the bowl, and it actually left a really nice couple of spots on the outside that I could accentuate later. So from here, I'm just kind of smoothing out the surface, tidying up the spots that need to be cleaned up. Once the inside was cut, I decided to go back over the outside, even though I already spent that time sanding it. So I kind of wanted it to be nice and true. That's the perfectionist in me, I guess. You can see how the wood just has a slight bit of a wobble down there. Once that was done, and of course, let's go ahead and break the bowl before I can finish it. I went back to sanding it. I did sand the inside and outside again. Again, starting with 80 grit, going up to 320. Now for these videos, I use a lot of dust collection. I use dust collection. I have a vacuum. I've got a fan that's blowing any sort of residual dust flying around the room outside. I have a little filter on the fan that I put onto it so that it kind of catches some of the excess dust in the air. So it's always noisy in here. I don't know that I'll ever really add sound to the videos. I mean, I'd like to add music. I'm happy with doing narration. Kind of interested in any opinions. If you have an opinion on that, whether you like music or whether you like just narration or you just want me to shut up so you can watch it, I'm open to any suggestions there. Here I'm kind of accentuating the imperfections in the bowl. I wanted to kind of clean up some of the little rough spots. Now it did have a little bit of a wiggle to this particular crack, so I did fill it in with just the tiniest bit of glue to keep it from wobbling or coming apart during regular use. Clean out some of the excess dust so I can kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like as a finished piece. So I start with a beeswax mineral oil mix with a bit of pumice, quadruple aught pumice that I put into the wax mixture. What the pumice does is it fills in some of the rough cracks, some of the little imperfections in the surface of the wood. And I find that it gives it just a slight bit of a smoother feel. Plus, as I go to turn on the lathe, the granules of pumice will actually kind of increase the polished surface a little bit. This works exceptionally well on hardwoods and gives them a nice, smooth, glassy almost type of finish. This is my own kind of a mix of this. You can purchase things like Yorkshire Grit that do the same thing. I just decided to try this out on my own with some pumice, and I was thinking of maybe trying some other types of materials like walnut husks or other hard materials that might do sort of the same thing. So again, just giving it a nice rough polish with the wax and pumice. I did go back over it with my normal beeswax and mineral oil and gave it a nice, clean, smooth finish with the wax. I really like a nice wax finish for some reason. It brings out the most in the wood. Wax or oil, to me, just brings out the most. Kind of a feel for it. I guess it really depends on the kind of piece that you're doing. In some cases, you want something super shiny. In some cases, you want the texture of the wood to just kind of be the center point of the finish. So every piece is slightly different. Sometimes I'll throw on a final layer of or final finish of walnut oil, which is really pretty. Other times, if it's something that I know is just going to be used around the house but not in the kitchen or with food or anything, I will go ahead and give it some sort of maybe a satin poly finish. So here's the normal wax without the pumice in it, and you'll notice that it doesn't soak in nearly as quickly because some of those pores have already been taken up with the previous wax. But I like wax also for the imperviousness of it. Like, I could use this bowl for soup, and it probably will hold the water or liquid in the soup pretty well. But I mean, I'm not planning on it. That's just ideas. All right, with the bowl turned inside out and finished, now's the time to finish the bottom of the bowl. So I swapped out the chuck for a little jig that I had made. It's basically a back plane, some plywood, and MDF with some sandpaper on it. This is a very common thing that I see quite a bit of turners do. Now, I did sort of cheat with this. I went to the bandsaw and cut off the tenon and just went ahead and finished the outside. Since I had realized that this was too big for my coal jaw set, finishing it this way just seemed like the quickest, easiest way to get it knocked out. And it came out nice and smooth, very flat, no problems there. At which point I did go ahead and brand it with my brass branding. A very good friend of mine designed this brand for me. So big shout out to them. You know who you are. Sand off some of the rough edges, get rid of the brown left over by the smoke, and then finish it off with some wax. Again, I used the pumice part first, or the pumice mix first, and then graduated to the regular wax and mineral oil mixture. So there you have it. A nice white cedar bowl. It's very, very light. It doesn't weigh much at all, honestly. It's so light. I think that was the first comment my wife made when she picked it up. Wow, it's so light. I really like the way that a piece came out. Feel free to leave any comments or speculation or anything that you want to leave down in the comments. And thank you for watching. I really appreciate the time that you've taken to watch all the way through. So have a great day.